Landon and Robbie from Grow Up. We have an amazing guest today, Monica Cline. She was trained by Planned Parenthood. She is a former CSE educator, and she's here to talk about so many important issues. You do not want to miss this episode. Robbie is rolling in
fashionably late.
So Monica, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, definitely. I know that there's some pressing issues, stuff going on in Texas we have to talk about right now. It's kind of a battleground to see what happens in the rest of the country as far as CSE programs are being rolled out. But I wanted you to just inform our audience who you are, a little bit about what your story is, and where you started and what you're doing now with your incredible organization.
Sure. Well, I'm the founder of It Takes a Family, and It Takes a Family is about equipping parents to be that primary educator for their children at home, in the community, and through policy. And I created It Takes a Family because of my work that I did in comprehensive sex education. That's my former career. For over 10 years, I was a comprehensive sex educator. I started that career right out of college. I graduated from the University of Texas at Austin. And it was in 1996, and HIV was, definitely something that was at the forefront of everyone's minds. We were conducting HIV prevention in the community. My job was a street educator. I literally walked the streets of high-risk neighborhoods and talked about HIV prevention and passed out condoms and referrals. Within the first few months of working at this organization, Planned Parenthood called me. They were just across the street from my office. And they asked me to come in and so that I could be trained and mentored by their director of sex education. And they said it was really important that I learn how to share the message of comprehensive sex education with school-age children. And so she sat me down for a private training, and she let me know the horror stories of all these girls coming into the clinic, girls as young as 10, getting abortions, having sexually transmitted diseases, and in some of the even some more graphic things, just objects in their bodies. It was so sad. And I said, you're right. You've convinced me. Teach me how to teach these girls not to be sexually active. They were 10 years old. And she said, no, dear, we're not going to teach them not to have sex. We're just going to teach them how to do it safer. And so she started to teach me about comprehensive sex education, which is risk reduction education. It's not the only desired behavior change for comprehensive sex education is the increased use of condoms and lubrication and testing and abortion. And that's it. And so one of the first lessons she taught me is that when I would walk into a room of young people, that I was to assume that they've done anything and everything when it comes to sex. And if they haven't, that they will. And that it was my job as a comprehensive sex educator to teach them every form of sex and how they can reduce their risk by using condoms. And I believed her and trusted her because, hey, they're getting Title X funding. They're the experts, right? If they're being funded by the government, I just assumed that they knew what they were talking about and that all of this was good and right. This was public health. And the people in the community trusted them as well. But over my 10 years, working at this HIV organization that was also a gay organization, I then eventually started working as towards the end of my career as a Title X training manager for the states of Texas and New Mexico. And at that point, I was training Planned Parenthood. So I had a long relationship with them. And in all those 10 years, one of the things that they always said to me is that parents are a barrier to service. They identified parents as an obstacle. They knew that they were the people who would stand between Planned Parenthood and the children. And so they did everything possible to ensure that children were either giving anonymous names or doing anything that was possible so that parents wouldn't find out. They have a very distorted view of our children, and they believe that parents are the barrier, parents are the problem, parents are old-fashioned or whatever they want to call them. And they do a great job of counseling these young people and gaining their trust. And to the point where these kids are agreeing to keep all these secrets from their parents because they're afraid that their parents are going to be angry with them. So really, it's amazing how when we talk about socialism today, and we've been talking about that quite a bit. This is very similar to that because they are deciding that they should be the authority over these children. They are trying to replace families with themselves. over the health of these children. So the impact is great. When I left that organization, I knew that parents were the key, and that's why I established It Takes a Family, because I want to make sure that parents are leading in their home and leading in the community, and again through policy.
Let me ask you a question. So, isn't it on its face kind of insane that we're asking Planned Parenthood to go and educate children on safe sex when they're the ones who stand to benefit if the kids don't have safe sex? It's kind of like asking McDonald's to teach kids how to eat healthy. It doesn't really make any sense to me. Does it make any sense to you?
I'll tell you why it makes sense to me, because they are very smart and they know that when they can help children, and this was, again, one of the lessons they told me, children are going to have natural inhibitions to talking about sex. So you have to break down those inhibitions. So they know that they need to normalize childhood sex to convince these children to be sexually active. And so what happens, Robbie, is that when they go through this kind of sex education, they learn how to dehumanize themselves and dehumanize others. They really, because sex is talked about as a material thing. It's just something to gain pleasure. There isn't anything about relationships in any of this. It is literally just about behavior and using condoms. And it's very graphic. So the children start, their attitudes and their inhibitions begin to change. Now, sex education, I always say, is the vehicle to abortion. So when Planned Parenthood can help these children change their attitudes, reduce their inhibitions, and now they're involved in recreational sex and they're dehumanizing one another, it's that natural next step to then dehumanize the preborn child. And they're not telling children about fetal development. They're not telling children about the life of this child, just like they're not telling them the reality of the consequences of having recreational sex. So these kids, it's a real mind manipulation, because and I hate to say it, but I was part of training Planned Parenthood on how to conduct client-centered counseling skills to gain the trust of these young people, and to talk to them and say, I know that your parents are probably going to be mad at you that you're thinking about having sex, or that you are having sex. And we want you to know that we're here for you. We're not going to judge you. We're going to take care of you. And we'll do whatever we need to help you and ensure that your parents don't know. So then these children are like, oh, okay, they really care for me. And they're basically, and this is my warning to parents, is that they are creating not only a barrier between you and your parents, you and your children, but they're teaching these children to keep secrets. Only predators do that, right? Only a predator would convince a child to not talk to their parents and keep secrets from them. And that is exactly what Planned Parenthood is doing. So sex education is the marketing tool or the vehicle to abortion. So now you have a customer for life. You have now brought up all these young children to objectify themselves and dehumanize each other. Inevitably, they are going to get disease. Inevitably, they're going to conceive a child. And so now they've got this customer for life for abortion. And the cycle just continues, which it's a sad cycle. And I watched these communities working in these high-risk neighborhoods. I was watching them slowly die because of this education.
And that brings up, two things. Number one, they do target minority communities. You look at New York, you have more Black babies aborted every year than born in New York City. Secondarily, I would say I'm living proof of the consequences of going into public schools and teaching kids this sort of sexual education, because what they did is they didn't teach us about fetal development when I had sex ed in public school. Okay. And that was almost, they started rolling stuff out like this. It was probably close to 20 years ago, 18 years ago, something like that. And they didn't teach us about any of that. So they taught us that it was just a clump of cells, and they make it a very this is a lifeless thing. There's these crazy people who make it sound like it's not, but these are just cells. Look under a microscope at cells. Do you really feel bad about, and that was sort of how it was framed. And now on the flip side of that, I remember too that they talked about the fact that, you don't need to talk to your parents about this. And they were doing that even then. And now it's progressed even further into something even more distorted and weird than it was then, because now they're introducing ideas of all these crazy new sexual things, and in a lot of ways almost talking down on normal sex. We've heard it in one of these CSE things referred to as basic sex. And if anybody's unfamiliar with young people, the word basic is not something you want to be. Basic is like, there's actually like a meme about it being vanilla, a basic,
right.
B-I-T-C-H is like, that's not something you want to be.
Right.
And so by virtue of them calling it basic in sex ed, it makes it sound like, oh, well, you're a prude if you only have basic sex. It's been reframed from pressure to have sex to you're a dork if you have regular sex. That's how it's been reframed, you know, and I know there's some people who disagree with that, but that's how the young culture is seeing this, you know. And if you need any more proof of that, look at what's popular in pop culture, okay? The number one hit right now is WAP, okay? I come from a world where I know the analytics of these videos. I've directed some of the biggest rappers in the world, which is something that I regret from my previous career. And I call it my previous career because I've basically been blacklisted for coming out and saying these things. But I know the analytics. They target children. They're targeting minors. You look at the analytics for WAP, I guarantee you their target audience is under 18.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. You use that in conjunction with the sex ed they're getting where they're having races to put on condoms. You're destroying an entire generation. And it's not just about them being overly sexualized. It's about what this does to their confidence, what it does to their personalities, to their overall development as a human being. We are destroying them for life. This is going to take decades and decades and decades to undo what's being done in such a short period of time while they're impressionable. And this doesn't end with them. There's a bunch of other victims yet to come from this. Okay. Yeah. You look at what is going to happen when these kids have kids. They are kids themselves. And in a lot of ways, the psyche that you build around the ideas that they're being sold are going to leave children being parented by adult children. And when that happens, those children are going to end up being the victims of abuse, over-sexualization, sexual abuse, and God knows what else.
And it's already happening, Robbie. I mean, we're already seeing it happening.
Have a price. And I've heard a lot of, people on the left say, there's no price to pay for this. This is just a cultural shift. There is a price to pay, and we'll be paying it for a very long time. So I just want to say that. I know you have great questions, but it just makes me so upset because we called this out when California was bringing CSE in. We were on top of it then, and people looked at us like we were crazy. Now it's coming to Texas, and this, while it, makes me feel good that we were right about what happened in California, it doesn't make me feel good. I wish that we were wrong, but we were right. And I remember parents looking at us like, especially looking at Lena like she was nuts. She would explain to them what was in the curriculum, explain what it was, and they would look at her like she was crazy because they're like, nobody's told me that from school.
Well, they would flat out, accuse me of lying. And I want to ask you about that. If this agenda and this ideology behind, the sex frameworks is really science-based and abstinence-based and has the results to prove it, why is there such a concerted effort to hide the curriculum from parents? Can you explain the lengths that they go to hide it, why it's hidden, why they use clever language to try to seduce parents into accepting this?
Right. Well, because there's a level that they know that a lot of parents are concerned, right? So they have to use this really nice language. They have to use language about it needs to be inclusive. I mean, you're using all these words that people are like, well, if I'm against it, then I'm against diversity.
Right.
But the truth is that if we just focus on behavior, period, regardless of age or sex, gender, color, any of it, the truth is that all children deserve to be protected from sexualization. All children deserve this. Talking about being medically accurate, Robbie, what you were mentioning is that they were not teaching you medical accurate things in school about fetal development. That was not medically accurate.
And it made me believe that abortion was not a big deal. And that's what I believed until the self-discovery when we were having our own first child, seeing the ultrasound and saying, you know what, something's off here. It's only 8 weeks and I'm seeing something that is definitely a human being. I'm going to look into the science of this. And I would say she had found that truth before I had, but seeing it and the effect of that, and then going and saying, you know what, I'm going to look at the science. I'm going to look at the peer-reviewed stuff and finding that there was science backing up that these fetuses can feel pain and
That's
backing
probably the
up
most
what's going
basic
on with their
science.
brain activity, it's a huge deal.
Yeah. So it's important for them to change the language. So back in 1996 and before me, we weren't allowed in the schools, but yet we're snuck into the schools. We weren't allowed to say certain words, but yet we still use those words. Today, what you're finding is that California is very brazen. I mean, they just kind of say whatever they want, but they still hide the curriculum. You're right. They still do that. They hide behind copyright and all of that. But a lot of it is being shown. And what I'm realizing is a lot of parents are so shocked by this, very similar to child sexual abuse, which I believe this is abuse, that they shut down and they don't want to look at it and they don't want to talk about it. And so, recently I was with some people of faith and they use these words. They said, we want to impact people, but in a quiet way, or we're called to a ministry, but we're not called to a controversial ministry. And they talked about having, that we're targets because of our beliefs. And so I restructured that conversation. I said, let's look at a different perspective. Like as people of faith, yeah, there's a big target on conservatives and people of faith. But you know who the real target is? When you look at Planned Parenthood and any of their associated children that they have born, like amaze.org. I mean, I call them their children because if you look at the history, a majority of these organizations were born out of a staff member from Planned Parenthood. So Planned Parenthood and her children, their approach to things they're very unified. And so basically what we're seeing here is that they're not ashamed and they're not targeting the adult. They're not targeting Robbie. They're not targeting me, but they're targeting our children. So, so I try to tell adults, it's like, don't be so afraid about being controversial because the truth is that you're not the target, the children are. So every day those children are going to school and they are being bombarded with ideology and propaganda every day. And if parents don't know how to respond, those children don't know how to react. So they want to be liked. So they're just going to fall into it. If it's cool, I don't want to be basic, whatever it is, they're just flailing around trying to figure it out. And these organizations are telling them, oh, your parents are probably going to get mad at you, so you don't have to tell them anything. And the parents are silent. And we cannot be silent. The two of you know that already, and you're doing something about it. We cannot be silent. Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to be weirdos or anything, but there's nothing out of the ordinary to stand up for what is right and to protect children. Now, one of the other arguments that I was given by the Texas School Board actually is like, well, what about foster children? And it's great that you talk about family and it takes a family and that this is so great, but what about children who do not have family? What about those in foster care? What about the homeless? And the truth is that here we have medically accurate information supported by science that abstinence truly is healthiest for our children. We have families who are protecting their children from being sexualized. We see that they're prospering because of that. They're succeeding because of that protection. Why then are we saying that children who have already been abused and abandoned deserve subpar information?
Yeah.
No, if anything, they deserve to be lifted up even more so. And we need to come together and support those children. Now, when it comes to public schools, though, I reached out to a friend who aged out of foster care, and I asked her this question. It's like, wait, what do we, here's the question. What do we do about those kids who don't have parents in their lives to teach them how to be abstinent or protect them? She said, the school is overstepping their authority and they're outside of their role. They are supposed to teach academics, not character, not values, not sex. They're supposed to teach academics. And if they have a child who's in foster care and they see that that child is having an issue with sex for whatever reason, then they go to the authority in that child's life, which is the state. And you take it to the state and then they take care of it. But the public school is not supposed to be stepping in. The same thing with children who have their family of origin. The public school does not have the right to be taking on the role of a parent or a sex educator. They are trained to teach math and science and English and history. They're not meant to do this. They're stepping outside of their role, but yet they continue to do this. And this is because of pressure from organizations like CSE and Planned Parenthood. So in Texas, what they're doing is that they know we have a Texas education code that says that sex education is optional in school districts, that parents on the local level can make a decision on that. And then it says that if they choose to do that on the local level, it must be abstinence-based and medically accurate. So now we're seeing that these work groups and the TEA are now, recommending basically mandating sex education through education standards, which would mean it doesn't matter if someone brings in sex education. It's now going to be part of school in every textbook. And Robbie, when you mentioned that you were not taught about fetal development, one of the work groups actually pulled out fetal development, but yet inserted education on normalizing abortion. So there is an obvious agenda to change the values and the character of our children, and they're not using truth. They're avoiding moral absolutes, and they're avoiding biological absolutes. I mean, they're not medically accurate, and I will never say that they are medically accurate, because they're not. And so here we are testifying against these these recommendations for new health standards in our Texas schools, but we know we're going to have to take it up a few levels. Like, I'm not confident. We're going to testify because that is what we should be doing, but we're not going to stop there because there's obviously a bigger agenda, and we need to get some bigger guns in there and really make an impact on the board.
Yeah.
Right. I would specifically about the agenda. I think that it's important for parents to understand that there's a few layers here. It's not just about, the monetary gain of abortion and Planned Parenthood's bottom line.
Right.
There is an agenda, a leftism rooted agenda, which is, Planned Parenthood works with the UN worldwide to try to inject these radical sex ed curriculums and impose them on countries that actually, many of them actively reject them.
Right.
And I think that people need to understand.
And it's under threat. It's under the threat of, or else we won't give you this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Won't give you food or whatever the aid is.
Or other medical care.
Right. Yeah. So I wanted to see if you could talk about that, about the sexual rights agenda. What does that mean? Who does it apply to? And what do parents need to understand? Because is from what I could read on the UN, on their agenda framework, it classifies a 10-year-old, young as 10, as an adolescent. So if sexual rights apply to a 10-year-old, what does that mean?
So we can go back all the way back in the 40s with Alfred Kinsey. When I worked at that gay organization, my first job, they hailed Alfred Kinsey as just their hero. And Alfred Kinsey, I won't go into a lot of detail, but he was a very unethical man who did a lot of unethical research. He really researched.
Layton's talked about him a lot on the show.
Okay,
actually.
So your audience kind of knows who he is now. So based on that research and that horrible table that about, that's when we started to talk. He was really the one that started that children are sexual from birth. And I have heard even Christians saying that today because it has been said so often, like branding, that people have now accepted it. So just because we are born, all of us, with reproductive organs does not mean that we are now supposed to be sexually active. But these organizations, when they talk about the sexual rights of children, they are talking about children having the right to sexual pleasure. And there have been from the UK lately, different areas of the world where we are seeing curriculum showing little children how to masturbate. And this is horrific. So as soon as any government will accept the sexual rights of children, we're going to see that the parental rights will be squashed. So what I tell my audiences usually is, when you think of human rights, you think of an individual, you think of an oppressor. There's an oppressor who's trying to squash the rights of another human. So when you think of children having sexual rights, who is the one person who is trying to keep that child from having sexual pleasure or keep them from being sexually active? Who would that be? It's usually the parent, right? Parents are going to try to keep children from being sexually active or having an adult having sex with them. And so again, the target, when we talk about the sexual rights of children, we're basically saying that parents are a barrier to children having sexual rights. And you see this today in various ways. So you see Planned Parenthood saying that parents are a barrier to the health services, reproductive health services of their children. So they find ways to get parents out of the picture. There's Jane's due process that keeps parents out of the picture and allows young children to be able to have abortions. You see a lot of the transgender bills coming out saying that parents are a barrier to the health care of their children. So we're basically, what you're seeing, this agenda is giving children who cannot make these decisions on their own these human rights, that really what they're trying to do is to squash the rights of parents. And that is a socialist and communist agenda where they do not want private property, private business, and they do not want a private family. And you're going to see this alive and well in the CDC. Says it a lot that teens have, instead of saying that that they're trying to keep parents out of a teen's healthcare, they call it adolescent privacy and confidentiality. What that really means is we don't have to tell the parents anything. But there's also other programs that they're doing to bring all of this into the schools. It's very much predatory. If they want to get to our children and change their character and their values and their behavior, then like any predator, you're going to go to the place where you're going to find the most children, a park, a school, anywhere where there's children. So here we have this agenda coming into the schools, making it seem like they're there to help the parents who are working full time. So now we're going to provide them this program through the CDC is called Whole School, Whole Community, Whole Child. They are advocating for more school hours for the child to be at the school for longer hours than they already are. They will provide them with general practitioner care, dental care, mental health care. And all of it sounds, oh, it's so nice. It's a community. Everything's so great. But really, it's the institutionalization of our children, less time with the parents, more time in the school. And so we have to be really careful in each of our individual states that if you see any bills that are talking about the rights of children, the sexual rights of children, know that if that gets passed, that will be a great way to keep parents out of the picture.
Yep. And look out for anything that says CSE or the sexual education bill, anything like that, any curriculum change with that stuff, you got to look out for.
And I would point out too that, sometimes it's too radical for some states to just openly embrace mandatory sex ed. So where does they start? They're starting with the gender identity stuff. That's the, the precursor there. So that in California, we saw that now they've mandated, they mandated that first. And what parents need to understand about that is being a segue to the CSE is, they claim that it's not sexual or anything like that, but it's introducing leftist, politicized ideas, progressive ideas about human sexuality, including, the Keynesian theory, gender identity frameworks, all of that. So parents are thinking they're getting an inclusive, storytelling time, maybe that includes stories about how gay people should be treated equally and yada, yada, yada. I don't know what, some people think in their heads is going on, but in reality, that's not what's going on. In reality, they are grooming our children to prime them for this next thing coming, which is this mandated extreme sex ed curriculum. And I agree with you. I believe this is a child abuse. We're seeing this soft grooming happen. And I think that parents need to read listen to people like you that tell them what is taught. And I really think that it would be great if you could share with us some of these examples, because if I was a parent listening right now, I'd say, okay, what exactly is so extreme about it? What do they do? What is specifically they say? So could you tell our audience what some of the things you've experienced and were taught to do?
Right. So a lot of that is going to be, again, that soft messaging, even with the children, is that, well, it's time to learn about your bodies, and it's a very slow progression. And we start, one of the first exercises that they taught me to do was to have the kids name all of the sexual parts, whether it was medical terms or just slang terms. And they were inhibited, but I would write all those terms up on the board. And by the end of the exercise, seeing that the authority in the room, which was the educator, was not upset with them for saying these crass, dehumanizing words, even the quiet ones were participating. So now they've received the message that we can dehumanize each other because now I can refer to your body parts in these ways. It's not a big deal. Also, what's happening in that situation is that now children who are used to only talking about these private things with their parents in the protective covering of their family, Now they've learned that they can talk about it with their peers and in such a graphic way, and with a complete stranger who is considered the teacher of the classroom.
Yep.
And so what we're seeing now is that as the education gets even more and more graphic, why would a child think it's weird if another adult talks to them about sex when all of this is normal, right? Why is it weird that, an adult would text me about that because all of this is normal, right? And so it's this grooming of our children for sexual abuse and for human trafficking. It really puts them at a very vulnerable position. The other thing that the comprehensive sex is doing is that it uses role playing a lot. So when you use role playing, this is all about behavior change, and so the desired behavior change on the surface is to ensure that these children are using condoms and to have them use condoms more often. But really what's happening is through these role plays, they do condom negotiation skills. So you present a scenario to a young girl or a young boy and together that you're at a party, you're about to hook up, and so now even if these children have never thought of that or have never been in that situation, they're now role playing a highly sexualized scenario and coming up with ways on how they can convince one another to use condoms, which means we taught them how to eroticize it. Like, it's going to feel good, or we can use some lube. And it just goes on. And so now, not only have you exposed them to all of this, you're getting them to practice it, which actually does a lot of brain work in their minds. So this is a real manipulation.
Well, you're forming the mental connections, because the next time that they go to a party then, and maybe where in the past they would have been really nervous to kiss each other and it would have ended at a kiss, now their brain is wired to think, okay, we kiss, now we talk about condoms, now we negotiate condoms. And that's what they've been, basically essentially taught to do. They've been desensitized and taught to do.
Exactly. And just like Planned Parenthood, go ahead.
I was about to say it's a mistake that they, in most cases, bring in somebody who is a total stranger. In every other subject, we trust their teachers that are there with them all year long to teach them everything. But with sex ed, it's the one thing we bring in an outsider for, that the kids don't know, who work for, who knows what organization, in many cases Planned Parenthood or who else.
Right.
And they're the ones teaching this. So you can get away with a lot more, and that's the reason they do that. But continue, please, and tell the audience exactly what they're doing with the kids.
Right. And so a big piece of this too, because they're talking about prevention of disease and such, they're going to focus very much on behavior. And so when Planned Parenthood said these kids are going to do anything and everything when it comes to sex, and if they haven't, or if they say that they haven't, they will. So just talk about it anyway. So we talk about oral sex in great detail. We talk about vaginal sex in great detail. We talk about anal sex in great detail. We talk about sex toys. They talk about multiple partners at once, orgies, how you basically, if you've got multiple people and you've got sex toys, then we get into details about using a new condom on every person and washing it. And I mean, it's just, it gets incredibly graphic. And it's all about those different behaviors. And so now it's going even the step further. Now they're telling them to medically inaccurate information about their gender, that they may not be who they thought they were, or that they can experiment with other orientations, or they can experiment in all these different ways. And the language that they're using is that they're setting them up for the hookup. Just today I posted some things on Facebook from Teen Source. They text me, which they're texting thousands, and this is coming out of California, thousands of teenagers, these texts that tell them how to have safer sex and how to get to clinics. And today it was how to put on a condom, and they showed 2 videos, and they wrote out how to use the condom. For Christmas, they said, okay, well, because you're maybe not around your friends, you could get condom packets and turn them into earrings. So they actually had these crafts for the girls to make earrings out of condom packets. And so all of this is just changing the values and the attitudes, the sexual attitudes that our children have, to really dehumanizing one another. And it's at great peril, because it's not just hurting them physically, but it's hurting them emotionally and spiritually, and putting them at great risk.
You brought, when you said, the condom thing, what they're doing to kids, and spiritually, I want to talk about that for a moment because we all know Teen Vogue. We've talked a lot about Teen Vogue and what they do on this show and how horrible they are for the health and safety of our kids. They work very closely with Planned Parenthood, endorsing one another. They work hand in hand. One of the things that they did do is release one of their many awful articles, was releasing something about how teaching kids how they can masturbate to Christmas music. So I just want to, this is happening.
Thank God.
Absolutely
Thank
disgusting.
God Teen Vogue, we did a little digging. Their reader base is actually a very small part teens now. It's almost exclusively people in their early 30s or late 20s. And that's because parents have pulled the plug. That's why they don't print Teen Vogue anymore, because thank God there's parents out there who are on top of this and are saying, nope, you're not reading that. And, you know, that's one of the overarching things that I have to tell parents is we're, as much as we want to be friends with our kids, that's not our job. Our job is to be their leaders, their teachers, and to provide safety and protection for them. And we know the right timing for our children to be able to learn things as they progress and we prepare them for adulthood. The media doesn't know when that right timing is. The media is working for a different master. They're working for a different agenda. They're not working for the betterment of your child. And that's something people have to come to terms with. And when I say media, I mean everything. I think it was really poignant what you said about the fact that they are behaving like predators. They're in the same places a predator is. They're on the internet for your child. That's where they're waiting for them, and they're waiting for them at school. You know, these are the same sorts of patterns you see from predators and people who kidnap children. They do it from oftentimes kids leaving school or at school or online, you know, and that's where we're seeing them now, online via YouTube and chat rooms and social media, TikTok, all those places. And then at school in these sex ed CSE programs and whatnot.
Right.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because Teen Vogue is, you know, even though they're not, you're saying that the print isn't as powerful as it used to be, but on TikTok, Instagram, you're going to find Teen Vogue pushing this to the kids nonstop, and it's just popping up.
That's where their most power with teens is now, is their social media pages, not their online, their actual online teenvogue.com. It's viewed and visited majority by adults. And that is a change. That's a sea change from the past, where it used to be predominantly teenagers viewing it. So that's a change that I think you can attribute to parents. But I think it's also, you know, part of behaviors of teens is they're not so much like readers in that sense. They're more social media consumers. So you're totally right that they're getting a lot of that same content from TikTok, from those places. So, you know, it's honestly, that's one of the weirdest things to me over the last, like, I'd say 6 years, is this shift in parents just being like, oh yeah, my 10-year-old wants TikTok. Sure. Yeah, you can TikTok. I don't know what they're thinking or how this happened, but the idea that you can trust 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds. I mean, our daughter, her friends were starting to get TikTok when she was 8 or 9. And they were getting Instagram pages and stuff like that. It is when we lived in California. And that was a real eye opener for us. We're like, these are smart people. Their parents are smart. These are people who, like, in a lot of cases, like, these are people who make millions of dollars, and they're so dumb that they'll hand their
highly educated people.
They'll hand their kid a phone with no barriers to access. Of just like, yeah, go ahead, social media your life up, do whatever you want, go on Instagram, go on TikTok.
Yeah, and this is why It Takes a Family is so important, and other programs that are focusing on family. I mean, I've been around parents where I shared kind of a happy story about my son and not playing video games. And those parents got mad at us, you know, and it was just a simple story that we noticed our son was overly obsessed with playing video games, you know, and we didn't even really buy a good video game. It was really to use the Blu-ray player. This was years ago, but he just couldn't stop thinking about it. He's like, can I play now? Can I play now? And I said, you know what, we're just not going to play with video games. You know, 'cause we lived out in the country. There was no need to play video games. Couple of years later, he comes in and says, you know, I'm so glad I don't play video games. I'm like, well, why is that? And he said, well, I know how to longboard. I know how to ride a motorcycle. I know how, and he listed all these things that he did outdoors. He's like, and my friends are so boring. They just want to sit inside and play video games. So we're sharing this with some friends because we were so proud. They got mad at us. They were mad at us because we were saying something negative about video games. And so
that says a lot more about them than about you guys. In fact, you should tell her the story about what happened to our son. He was called when he was in school. He was called for not playing video games. When they told him
yeah, something that you shouldn't have been born. Something's wrong with you. You don't like playing video games. Something's wrong with your brain.
You were born with a broken brain.
Yes.
You shouldn't have been born if you don't like video games. And
That's
you know, like, it's awful. It's also stupid. Like, kids say dumb stuff. So I'm,
Yeah.
you know, I'm very forgiving of dumb things kids say. But it goes to the psyche of how people are being parented and what's
Yes.
being allowed, because our son has never played video games, not because we ban video games. I think actually he's played Mario Kart like twice in his life. Like he's just not interested, you know? And I think that if you give your kid a broad spectrum of things they can be interested in and you engage them in those interests, it's not going to be very often that they go, oh yeah, the video game's the thing that I want.
Right.
You know?
And that is the key, Robbie, is that when we're able to engage with our children in those ways and stimulate their brain with positive play and being outdoors and having fun with the family, we're creating a bond with our children. And that is so important, because when our children have that bond with us and they recognize what's good, they're not going to accept what Planned Parenthood is telling them. And so when I raise my son, I let him know this, you know, I'm your greatest advocate. There's no question that you'll ever have that I'm going to be upset about. There's nothing that you're going to do, even if you make a mistake and I don't like it. But the truth is you need to come to me, because only I am going to give you the best advice. Only I am going to be there to advocate for you and make sure you're safe. So do not be scared to talk to me, because I will always be there for you. And he did do those things. And Robbie, earlier you mentioned about, you know, the schools and these different people, they don't know when your child is ready for sex education or how much. And this is what I tell parents all the time, that if this is mandated in the schools, if this is provided in the schools, that means that your child, whether they're comfortable or uncomfortable or not, if they're uncomfortable, it doesn't matter. It will be forced on them. We had a parent with a teenage girl who came home really upset because she said that there is a male sex educator in her class and he was eroticized, because the comprehensive sex education is to make it fun. They eroticize it. And she felt deeply uncomfortable because she spent a whole hour listening to this man talk to her about intimate sexual things. And she did not like it, but she couldn't say anything, or she felt that she couldn't. She was required to be there. And this was in California. So even our children,
I see that as a form of sexual harassment.
It is. It's sexual. It's forcing her to be a part of something that she's not comfortable being a part of. What I told my son growing up is, you know, he'd ask questions, and there's nothing wrong with questions. So I tell parents that, like, do not be afraid when they ask you questions about their body, or like, you need to, you know, it's normal. And so he asked me some questions when he was pretty young, and I knew not to answer beyond his ability to understand or what was appropriate. But even then I said, okay, Ibri, if I'm going to answer your question to the best that I think you should know at this time of your life. But if I share something that you're not comfortable with, I want you to hold up in your hand and say, Mom, that's enough. And about 3 times in his life, he did that. He said, Mom, that's enough, because he wasn't ready to hear anymore. And that's okay. And he didn't suffer. He wasn't ignorant, but I went at his pace. And he was very well adjusted. And that is important when it comes to sex education. The sex education should belong in the home, in the home. And if the argument is that parents don't know how to teach it, then come to ittakesafamily.org, email me, and I will be happy to help you. But I promise you, it does not have to be graphic. We do not have to be graphic with our children.
Yeah, you know, I would note in California, you know, when we were on top of that, there was a large group of parents who were, you know, I mean, heavily opposed it. And it was hundreds of thousands that went to Sacramento and tried to make this not happen, but were unsuccessful. All the parents got out of it was a book was removed from the curriculum that was going to teach kids about blood play, BDSM, and fisting. These are things that they had originally had to go in the curriculum. And it was sort of a, let's see what we can get away with. And that was the only thing that the parents got in return for their protesting and raising hell was, okay, we'll remove this one book and you guys shut up and be happy about it. But still, I think is it kindergarten or first grade where the gender
kindergarten
in California, it's now, you used to be able to opt out of all sex ed. If you just didn't want your kid to do it, you could opt out. Your kid skips that day of school, no big deal. It's not like that anymore. So with the gender theory stuff in California, it is required starting when your kids, it's either kindergarten or first grade. It is required, and they teach them that there are countless genders. It's basically unlimited, and your parents may not understand it, so your parents are wrong. So basically undermining the parent again, which is the goal of any leftist ideology. They always need to undermine parents. The same thing you see, like, and like you said, linguistics is so important. You see the same thing in the Black Lives Matter movements. The linguistics of Black Lives Matter, of course, you don't want to be the person that sounds like you're opposing that phrase. Nobody wants to sound like that person because you sound like a racist. They use that intentionally because they're fusing, and where all these donations are going is to the Black Lives Matter organization that says they stand for destroying the nuclear family. They say it on their website. They make no qualms about it. They say that basically, you say it takes a family, they say it takes a village, and only the village. So essentially, this can be done collectively instead of individually, and your individual parental rights are not important. That's what people like the organization BLM stand for, and where their founder, who says avowed Marxist, that's what they want. And they do this within each of their movements on the left, is make sure that their linguistics are tight, and they use words like, diversity, inclusion, and things like that, because nobody wants to be the person who says, I'm not for that, because we are for diversity. I mean, just look at the Republican National Convention. It was a very diverse convention. I love it. It made me so happy. I think it was the best convention we've ever had, welcoming to all. But when you see that in a school setting, that we're prioritizing diversity, inclusion, and all those things, now we know these are actually code words for we're injecting leftism and progressive politics into school. It doesn't actually mean we're standing for diversity.
These
so parents need to be woke to that.
Even if parents are trying to homeschool, I mean, there's homeschool programs, and they have that same hidden agendas: diversity, inclusion, anti-bullying, tolerance. They're very clever about using these euphemisms.
Because nobody wants to oppose them.
Right. And I think that's where we have to have the courage to be able to say, that's not what you really mean, and I'm not going to debate it. I know that this is what you stand for. And if you note, and just like you both of you are saying, every leftist agenda, sex education, abortion, BLM, all of them are meant to destroy family. They're to eliminate the authority of parents in their children's lives. So we know that family is the key, and that's why I created It Takes a Family. So if they're targeting the destruction of family, then we know family is key, and we need to strengthen up those parents, and not just in leading at home, but in policy as well, because they are being very strategic in changing policy so that even if you want to say opt out or any of that, you can't, because now it's a law. Everyone will be forced.
I would say this too. Parents are also the victims of this ideology that is seeking to, basically divide parent and child, because these same propaganda messages that are directed at children, there are ones targeted at parents, but they've been targeted at you since you were a child, about the intelligence of parents. I mean, just look at TV shows. How many TV shows are there where there's a strong father who plays a strong role in their child's life, shows them real leadership? They're all turn on Disney Channel. Every dad in the show, if they're there at all, are gigantic doofuses who can't find, their shoes. I mean, these are not smart people. So they do that intentionally, how they portray fatherhood, how they portray motherhood. And then they send you the idea through every form of media that if you don't have X degree, you don't have X accomplishment, you are not accredited enough to have an opinion. You are not intelligent enough to have an opinion, therefore not intelligent enough to teach your child about important things. We are the people who will be teaching your child about important things, because we are the important ones with the important accreditations and the important diplomas, and that matters. That's what parents have been sold. So a lot of them psychologically have this idea that they're not fit to be the ones doing this. And that's something that we need to dispel entirely, because there is no better teacher for your child than you. Nobody knows your child better than you do.
That's right. And no one will advocate or protect their child more than the parent. So to abdicate, and, I was actually presenting to some 20-year-olds about this, and they were tired of it. They're like, why are parents today abdicating their authority over their children? Why aren't parents fighting? And that's what I keep telling, parents, is that our children really are waiting for us to lead. They're waiting for us to say and give them permission not to do these things. And I said, now, and I also tell them, embrace the eye roll. When you set a boundary, your kids are going to roll their eyes, they're going to complain. But every time we did that with our son, he was like cuddling with us and wanted to watch movies with us for the rest of the night. Kids want those boundaries. They want you to be that leader in their lives. They want to know that mom and dad will fight for them, protect them, love them, set boundaries. They want that. I had some of my sons, my son actually admitted that he was embarrassed that I was looking into, like, they were going to go to a concert, and he's in high school. So I was like, well, who's going and who's driving you and all this other stuff. And he said, Mom, later on, I told my friend, man, I'm really sorry. I'm embarrassed about my mom doing that. And he said, Ibri, I wish I had a mom who would do that. He's like, it's really cool that she did that. She wanted to make sure we were safe. And they want that. They really, really want that, to be involved in their lives in school. If you choose to do public school, we have seen it in our children's lives. Even my stepdaughters that are older, they've, one of them admitted to me that she was so glad her dad set these boundaries about her not dating until she was 16. Looking back, she said, I thought it was unfair, but the rest of my girlfriends got hurt so many times and I didn't. I wasn't ready for that. And I'm glad that my dad had those boundaries for me and protected me. So, parents really, you're right, Robbie. I think the media, in so many different ways, we've been attacked as families, as men, especially, I think have really been attacked. When we talk about a father who's standing up for his children or setting his foot down and protecting the family, they call it the patriarchy. There's just all this negative. They make it sound so negative that a father and a husband or a mother and a wife would be there unified for their children. And it's the most beautiful and most protective covering for our children. And the research supports that as well. So I think your voices and having, the way you invite people onto your show is so important, because it is giving people courage. I mean, y'all have seen that even happen with Abby Johnson. The fact that her movie came out, like, she's been speaking for many years, but, and many people would listen, but it was mostly the pro-life movement. As soon as that movie came out, we saw how the pro-life movement, even the pro-life movement, became even more courageous in speaking their stance for life. And then at the RNC, even more so, because why? Her leadership, she gave people that courage that I can speak too. And so we need to continue to stand up for family and children, because it's not a cuddly thing that we're trying to advocate for. It is the very cornerstone, the foundation of our society, to have healthy families, to then have healthy communities and healthy economy. We need it. So I appreciate everything y'all are doing and for having me on.
Oh,
thank you so much for joining us today.
I only have one other question.
Sure.
Okay, last question I have is, there's going to be, I'm sure there's trolls. I can't see the comments right now, but one of the number one things I hear during conversations like this from people on the opposing side is conservatives just hate sex. Republicans just hate sex. People who think this way just hate sex. And I mean, from our perspective, we don't hate sex. I'm not going to go too deep in that, because I think people like us, what the real difference is that we believe in having a private life. We believe that what you do in your bedroom between two consenting adults is your business, and that it should be a private thing, that you have enough respect for your partner that you guys keep it private. But we definitely don't hate sex. So I'm curious, you've probably heard that before. What response do you give to that?
I'll tell you how I actually taught my son. Because a lot of times they say, well, parents are so bad about talking to their kids about sex because they hate sex or they're ashamed. When my son came to me, and I will, again, because I respect my son, I'm not going to give you the details of what he asked, but he was just starting into puberty, and something happened to his body, and he's like, what is going on, Mom? Because we had that confidence. And I said, Ibri, congratulations. You're going through puberty. Your body's doing exactly what it's meant to be doing. And all of this is really normal. And so don't be afraid, and when we did talk about sex later on, and he wanted, got old enough to ask the question about, okay, I am ready. Tell me, how does that happen? How are babies made? That next level thing. I told him and he was like, oh, he didn't like just the answer. And I said, well, let me tell you what it really is. And so I explained that intimacy between a mother and a father, a husband and a wife, and I explained how you're best friends and how this is something that you're going to share with them, and just kind of went into that. And I thought, okay, that was probably over his head. And he said, Mom, that sounds awesome. And so really talking to our children positively about sex doesn't mean it's graphic. It is about that intimacy. There's nothing wrong with sex, but there's definitely wrong with sexualizing our children and giving them books that normalize what you were talking about earlier, that book Scarletine, blood play, urine play, harming one another, sexual violence. That is not healthy. That is what we're opposed of. We are opposed to the pornification of our children, the sexualization of our children, to bringing pornography into the schools and into the public square. That is what we're opposed to. We want healthy sexual relationships for our children when they are married.
Yep. And I'll close it out from my end. I'll let you close, but on my end, this stuff is what leads to the bill that just passed in California. It's SB 145, right?
Yes.
Where they, it is now legal, or not legal, but essentially reduces, you're no longer going to have to be labeled a child predator. You're not going to have to be on the list anymore if you're within 10 years of your minor victim.
So basically a 24-year-old male can have sex with a 14-year-old and they will not be penalized by being put on the sex registry. Yep. So we are now creating bills and laws that protect sexual predators who harm children. That's
their priority in California.
That's the priority.
And he did the same thing with HIV. He's the one who decriminalized intentionally giving somebody HIV.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Scott Wiener. That is the author, Scott Wiener.
Scott Wiener. Yep. He's behind several other alarming legislations as well.
Yep.
I was just going to say to our viewers too, or to anybody who might be on different side of things from a conservative perspective, we are pro-science, pro-health, and that includes when we are teaching our kids sex education, which we believe they should be taught. There's this idea, this notion that we don't want to talk to our kids about sex. Couldn't be farther from the truth. But we want it to be medically accurate and scientifically accurate. And part of that science and medically accurate information is the fact that porn is harmful, has irreparable damage to the brain. These are scientific facts that not only do they omit these very relevant risk factors, but they also encourage things that are harmful. Equating anal sex to kissing and holding hands as a morally equivalent form of just showing affection to somebody you care about is toxic and harmful, because there's medical inherent risks of anal sex that are not the same as holding hands.
And that's in a CSE program. For parents who don't get the context there, that's in the CSE program. They make those equivalent gestures of showing your affection.
But they would find that, bigoted or anti-inclusive of the LGBTQ community for you to say something like that, because they would say, well, that might be how they show love and affection. So I think you can get an idea now what we're talking about when we're breaking down that ideology and how it's being presented. Okay. Are you guys there?
Okay, there you are.
For a second.
Yeah, we got her. She's
back. Why, especially in times today, these social issues they need to be coming from the home. That's how you're truly culturally respecting the rights of the parent and the rights of the family. And that's what it boils down to, is do we want to live in a society where the family no longer has rights, the parents no longer has rights, and the children belong to the state to the school? That is what this boils down to. So if we get anything from this today, this is same underlying theme about government control over children, over the family. Do you want that? Yes or no?
Right. And
Absolutely.
you know,
I
the
couldn't say
point
that
that you
better.
made about the gay community too is that in my time of working, in 10 years of working very closely with the gay community, not all gay men wanted to have anal sex. So to say that that is something that supports LGBTQ, not necessarily. Not everyone in the LGBTQAI plus community believes that comprehensive sex education is healthy or appropriate for children, and not all of them are participating in all the things that CSE is advocating for. Many of them are against it, but to speak out against it again would take a lot of courage for them as well. So it's not inclusive. It's a harmful agenda that is hurting families all over the world.
Yep. And I think true equality is protecting all kids, whether, they grow up to be gay or straight or whatever.
Right.
I think they all deserve to be protected, and none of them should be sexualized early. And I think that's actually one of the harmful things about our society and media is they actually do tend to try to overly sexualize kids who are in the gay community
They do.
Yes,
as
absolutely.
young as possible,
Yes.
They do.
even younger than ones who end up being straight. I'd say I see more of that, them being sexualized at younger and younger ages in media than I do even straight kids. So
Robbie, that
you
is
know,
my experience as well. And having worked in that area and we were doing that kind of education, when we would go to youth groups that were for gay youth, they always had bowls of condoms, bowls of lube, bowls of dental dams, and there was plenty of, basically sex toys for them to practice on. As far as using how to practice using a condom or such. So they were in a highly sexualized environment. And the CDC does say that children who are in the LGBTQ community are at higher risk than their heterosexual peers of a disease, not using condoms, and sexual violence. So these children identifying with same-sex attraction or gender identity, they need us to be protecting them. And teaching them to avoid these behaviors is very, very important.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much, Monica. We'll put your links down below.
Okay.
Visit her website. You guys can find out more about what she's doing. Thank you so much for the amazing work you're doing, and
Thank you.
we support everything you're doing for the fighting the legislation happening now in Texas.
What can parents do in Texas?
Oh yeah,
How can
what
parents
can
in
parents do
Texas
in
help?
Texas?
Well, they can go to the TEA website right now and decide to testify if they are feeling that they are against the mandate of comprehensive sex education in our education standards, then they need to testify about that. They can either do it through Zoom or they can send a letter to their school board member. And if they need more information and guidance on that, they can email me directly at monica@ittakesafamily.org, and I would be happy to help them. And there's a team of us, so they're not going to be alone in testifying. So monica@ittakesafamily.org.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank you guys.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great